The chamber of the Galactic Council gleamed with light from 1,000 worlds, each beam representing a civilization that had earned its place among the stars through centuries of advancement and diplomacy, and the crystalline walls of Threshold Prime reflected those lights into patterns that danced across the assembled delegates. Like living constellations, High Archivist Mothkar stood before the council, his ancient form wrapped in traditional robes that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, and his multiple eyes swept across the chamber with an urgency that made several younger delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. We have discovered troubling correlations in the ancient. Mothkar began, his voice carrying the weight of millions of years of accumulated knowledge, and his words echoing through translation devices that rendered his speech comprehensible to all present. The holographic display behind him flickered to life, showing a blue-green world orbiting a yellow star in an unremarkable spiral arm of the galaxy. And murmurs rippled through the assembly as delegates recognized the crude markings of a pre-contact civilization. This world is called Earth by its inhabitants, Mothkar continued, gesturing toward the rotating planet with one of his 6 manipulator limbs, while his speaking mouth remained focused on the council before him. And why should this concern us? Demanded Representative Quelix of the Vrin hegemony, her scales gleaming blood-red in the chamber's light as she rose from her seat with barely concealed. Impatient Samathor's eyes dimmed, a sign of deep concern among his species, and he manipulated the holographic controls to bring up a series of archaeological findings from dead worlds scattered across the galaxy over millions of years of history. We have found this pattern before, he said quietly, and the images showed ruins of vast civilizations, reduced to radioactive ash and monuments to species that had somehow vanished from all record despite having achieved faster-than-light travel 3 times in galactic history. We have encountered species matching this profile: bipedal, omnivorous, high aggression index, exceptional tool use capabilities, and most critically, an apparent inability to accept defeat or cessation of effort regardless of circumstances. Commander Zareth of the Varin military fleet leaned forward in his seat, his young face eager and unmarked by the scars that older warriors carried, and his voice carried the confidence of someone who had never faced a true challenge to his people's supremacy. You show us ruins and ask us to fear primitives who have barely left their home world, he said with a laugh that several other young delegates echoed around the chamber. Mothkar remained patient, his ancient eyes reflecting sadness at the familiar pattern of dismissal, and he brought up detailed scans of Earth's surface, showing cities, industrial centers, and primitive spacecraft that looked like toys compared to the vessels parked in orbit around Threshold Prime. They split the atom before achieving powered flight, Mothkar said, highlighting human technological development with growing urgency in his tone. They reached their moon using chemical rockets that would be considered museum pieces by any spacefaring culture, and yet they did so through sheer determination and the willingness to risk death they wore among themselves constantly, he continued, showing images of human conflicts that made some delegates look away from the casual destruction humans inflicted upon their own kind. But observe what happens after each conflict. They rebuild faster. They innovate more rapidly, they adapt their tactics and technologies, and they never make the same mistake twice. Quelix stood again, her position as representative of one of the galaxy's most powerful military forces, giving her words significant weight among the assembled delegates, who looked to the Vrin for leadership and marshal matters. The archivist asks us to fear a species that cannot even generate a proper shielding field, she said with contempt dripping from every word like venom from exposed fangs, a species that uses explosive propulsion for spaceflight like children playing with fireworks, and a species fragmented into hundreds of competing nations rather than unified under sensible governance. Her body language aggressive and her scales flushed darker with excitement at the opportunities she saw before them. I propose we bring these humans into proper civilization before they contaminate their local space with their primitive chaos, Quelix declared, and many delegates murmured agreement with the familiar logic of uplifting lesser species into Galactic Council Standard Commander. Zareth rose to stand beside his superior, His uniform pristine and decorated with honors earned in minor skirmishes against pirates and rebels who could never truly threaten Vryn's supremacy. "I volunteer to lead the contact fleet," he announced, his voice ringing with confidence that came from never having faced an enemy that could challenge his technological advantages. "We can have them compliant within a standard cycle, properly educated in civilized behavior, and ready to contribute resources to the greater galactic community." Mothkar raised all 6 of his manipulator limbs in the traditional gesture of ultimate warning among his people, and his voice took on a tone that silenced even the most dismissive delegates for a brief moment. "You do not understand." Each word carefully chosen and heavy with the weight of apocalyptic knowledge, the previous species matching this profile did not simply fail or fall to internal conflicts, they transformed the galaxy itself through their presence. And the records suggest that they became either universe-ending threats or vanished in ways that defy all known physics. He focused his primary eyes on Quelix and Xerath, trying to make them comprehend the danger they were courting with such casual arrogance. "They do not stop," Mothkar said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the vast chamber. "They do not yield, even when yielding would be logical and beneficial to their survival. And they adapt to any challenge placed before them with a speed that suggests evolution itself bends to their will rather than the reverse. They endure conditions that would break any other species' collective spirit," he continued, showing images of humans surviving in environments ranging from frozen wastelands to burning deserts to the vacuum of space itself, with only primitive protective gear. And most dangerous of all, they never forget a slight, never forgive a betrayal, and never stop pursuing a goal once they have committed to it, regardless of the cost in lives or resources. The council chamber fell silent for a long moment as delegates considered the archivist's warnings against their own assessment of the primitive world displayed before them. The vote, when it came, was overwhelming in favor of the Vryn proposal for contact and integration, with only the elder, archivists, and a handful of cautious species abstaining from the decision. Quelix scales gleamed with triumph as she turned to Commander Xerath and placed a clawed hand on his shoulder in a gesture of approval and blessing. "Make us proud," she said, her voice carrying both command and expectation. "Show these humans what it means to join civilized society, and bring glory to the Vryn hegemony through swift and decisive action." Xerath saluted sharply, his heart's pounding with excitement at the opportunity for advancement that had just fallen into his grasp like ripe fruit from an unguarded tree. As the council chamber emptied and delegates returned to their ships and quarters, Mothkar remained standing before the holographic display of Earth, his ancient eyes fixed on the blue-green world that spun in blissful ignorance of what was coming. "We warned them," he whispered to the empty chamber, his voice carrying the sorrow of someone who has seen this pattern before and knows how it ends. "We told them the truth. We showed them the evidence. We begged them to proceed with caution and respect rather than arrogance and force." He dimmed the display and turned away, his robes rustling with the weight of ages as he moved toward the archives where he would begin preparing records of what he feared was about to unfold. But no one ever listens, he said to himself, as the chamber lights began to dim. They never do. The Vryn fleet emerged from faster than light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system like predators appearing from the tall grass, and their ships gleamed with the polished perfection of a civilization that had conquered 300 star systems without ever facing serious resistance. Commander Xerath stood on the bridge of his flagship, the dominant will, watching the primitive blue world grow larger on his view screens, with the satisfied anticipation of someone about to complete an easy assignment. "Scan their defenses," ordered, his voice casual as he settled into the command throne that had been designed to project authority and power. To all who served under him, the censor officers, scales rippled with barely suppressed amusement as she reported findings that confirmed every assumption they had made about human technological inferiority. "They have approximately 400 satellites in various orbits," she said, highlighting each one on the tactical display with markers that pulsed in time with her words. "Most are for communications or observation. Perhaps 30 are equipped with primitive kinetic weapons, and their energy signatures suggest power generation barely sufficient for basic maneuvering. Xerath nodded, his confidence growing with each word of the report that painted humans as exactly the primitive species they appeared to be. Disable their weapons. Platforms, but leave the communications intact, he commanded. Gesturing with one clawed hand toward the weapons officer, we want them able to receive our message and coordinate
Their surrender.
After all, the Vrin weapons, designed to pierce proper military shielding and ablative armor, made short work of Earth's defensive satellites, which exploded into clouds of debris that would trouble human spaceflight for generations to come. Within 30 minutes of arrival, Earth's orbital defenses had been reduced to expanding fields of shrapnel, and Xerath allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before opening communications channels. The message went out in multiple human languages, translated by computers that had analyzed every broadcast Earth had ever sent into space with casual ease. People of Earth. Xerath's voice boomed across every communications channel on the planet simultaneously, interrupting broadcasts and emergency frequencies alike. You have been selected for uplift and integration into the Galactic Council, and you will submit to Vrin guidance in matters of governance, resource allocation, and technological development. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in across the billions of humans who were hearing about alien life for the first time in their history. You have seen our power demonstrated against your primitive orbital weapons, he continued, his tone carrying the certainty of someone who had delivered this speech to a dozen worlds before. Resist, and we will demonstrate further the futility of opposition through bombardment of your surface installations, or accept our generous offer of membership in galactic civilization under proper supervision. The response came not from Earth's governments, but from a simple radio transmission that puzzled the Vrin communications specialists. With its informal tone and strange request, "We hear you and understand your position," said a voice that spoke careful galactic standard with an accent that suggested recent and hasty learning. We request 48 hours to coordinate a response among our various nations and prepare for the what? Transition to your guidance. Xerath laughed, a sound like grinding stones that made his bridge crew smile with shared amusement at human naivety. Granted, said magnanimously, believing that he was showing mercy and wisdom by allowing the primitives time to come to terms with their new reality. You have 2 of your planetary rotations to prepare your surrender documents and identify your leaders for transition. He closed the channel and turned to his second-in-command, with satisfaction radiating from his posture. An expression, "See how simple it is when you demonstrate proper force," he said, gesturing toward the image of Earth floating peacefully on the view screen. By tomorrow, they will be begging to sign whatever documents we place before them, and we will return to Threshold Prime as heroes who brought another world into civilization. What Xerath did not understand, what his cultural framework could not even conceive of, was that humans had not asked for time to prepare surrender documents. They had asked for time to prepare for war across Earth. Every government opened its most classified files to every other government in an unprecedented sharing of military secrets. And corporations that had competed for decades suddenly became collaborators, sharing research that could help against the alien threat. Military analysts pored over every second of footage from the satellite destructions, measuring energy signatures and attack vectors with the desperate precision of people who knew their survival depended on finding weaknesses. In superior technology, they used directed energy weapons. Primarily, said a scientist at NASA, her voice hoarse from hours of continuous analysis. But the beams have to sustain coherence for 0.7 seconds to breach our satellite hulls, which means there's a targeting lock window we might exploit at a facility in Russia. Engineers were already adapting nuclear missiles to carry electromagnetic pulse warheads that might disrupt alien ship systems if they could get close enough. In China, military commanders were calculating the kinetic energy of tungsten rods dropped from orbit, and whether those primitive weapons might succeed where sophisticated technology would fail. The plan that emerged was insane by any reasonable military standard. suicidal by most calculations. But it had one advantage that the Vryn could not anticipate. It was based entirely on the assumption that humans would take casualties that no civilized species would accept when the 48 hours expired. Zirith opened communications, expecting to receive the coordinates where he should land to accept Earth's formal submission to Vryn authority. Instead, every radar on his ship screamed warnings about incoming projectiles from multiple vectors, and the tactical display lit up with so many threat indicators that it looked like a solid mass of red evasive action. Zirith shouted, but the response came too slowly for ships. Designed to face enemies with similar technology and predictable tactics, the first wave was crude. Chemical rockets carrying nuclear warheads that the Vryn point defense systems destroyed with contemptuous ease, filling space with expanding fireballs that the aliens barely noticed, but those explosions created electromagnetic interference that masked the second wave. Kinetic kill vehicles moving at velocities that stressed the limits of human engineering and struck with the force of small asteroids. The frigate Sacred Order took a tungsten rod through its engine section and went tumbling out of formation, its shields having been calibrated to stop energy weapons rather than solid projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. "Return fire," Zirith commanded, his confidence shaken but not broken as his ships began launching their own weapons at Earth's surface. But the humans had prepared for that too, evacuating cities and hardening military installations and underground bunkers that could survive anything short of planet-cracking weapons that the Vryn would not use on a world they intended to occupy. And then came the third wave, the one that truly horrified Zirith and his crew. Spacecraft of all kinds, from military vessels to civilian transports, all retrofitted with explosives and guided by pilots who transmitted final messages to loved ones as they aimed for Vryn ships. "They are ramming us," the tactical officer screamed, disbelief evident in every syllable. "They are piloting ships directly into our hulls and detonating on impact." The cruiser Eternal Dominance disappeared in a fireball when a human mining vessel packed with industrial explosives struck its bridge section, killing 300 Vryn in an instant space. Stations that the Vryn had dismissed as irrelevant suddenly fired every thruster they had, changing orbit to collide with alien ships, in acts of sacrifice that bought time for other human forces. Watched in growing horror as his overwhelming fleet advantage evaporated under an assault that violated every principle of civilized warfare he had been taught. "They are not fighting to win," his second-in-command said, voice shaking with realization. "They are fighting to hurt us regardless of cost. They are making us pay for every meter of space, and they do not care how many of them die in the process." The battle lasted 18 hours, and when Zirith finally ordered a retreat to regroup and reassess, he had lost 43 ships and over 8,000 crew to an enemy that should not have been able to scratch his pain taz. The surviving Vryn vessels limped away from Earth's orbital space. Zirith stared at the blue world that had just handed him his first military defeat and felt something he had never experienced before. "Genuine fear. Send a message to the Council," he said quietly. His earlier confidence shattered like the hulls of his lost ships. "Tell them that Earth requires a more robust civilizing force. Tell them that these humans are not like other pre-contact species. And tell them," he paused, remembering the archivist's warnings that he had dismissed with such casual arrogance just days before. "Tell them the elders were right behind him on the view screen." Earth continued its rotation, and already humans were analyzing the battle, learning from it, adapting their tactics, and preparing for the next engagement with the grim determination of a species that had just discovered they were not alone in the universe and had decided that would not make them weak. The Galactic Council's response to Zirith's defeat was swift and reflected their collective inability to comprehend what had actually happened in Earth's orbital space during those 18 terrible hours. "Clearly the Vryn underestimated primitive ferocity," said Representative Quelix, her scales now pale with embarrassment at her species' failure. "We require a proper military coalition representing multiple member species to demonstrate the full weight of civilized disapproval." And so the largest peacekeeping fleet in recent council history assembled at Threshold Prime. drawing ships from 14 different species and representing military might that had pacified rebellions across half the galaxy. The humans watched them come through telescopes and radio arrays, tracking the massive fleet's approach with the grim acceptance of people who knew they were outmatched, but refused to let that fact change their decision. Admiral Zhang stood in the hastily constructed war room, buried 3 kilometers beneath the surface of the moon, surrounded by officers from every nation who had set aside centuries of conflict to face the common threat. They will blockade us first. Pointing to tactical projections that showed likely alien strategies based on the limited engagement data they had collected, cut off our resource chains, destroy our manufacturing capability, enforce surrender through economic pressure rather than direct assault. Then we adapt, replied General Morrison from his position across the holographic display. We move manufacturing underground. We process asteroids for resources they cannot blockade. And we make every supply line they cut cost them more than it costs us. The war that followed was unlike anything the Galactic Council had experienced in 10,000 years of enforcing compliance. Among member species and integrating new civilizations, other species, when faced with overwhelming force and the reality of technological inferiority, made rational calculations about survival and accepted terms that allowed their civilizations to continue under Council guidance. Humans did something the Council could not understand. They made survival secondary to resistance when the Council fleet destroyed Earth's orbital manufacturing facilities. Humans built new ones inside hollowed asteroids that were invisible against the background radiation of space when energy weapons proved effective against human ships. Humans stopped building ships to withstand energy weapons and instead built cheap vessels designed to explode spectacularly when hit, filling space with shrapnel that damaged the expensive Council warships. When the Council established blockades around key resource asteroids, humans sent mining teams on one-way missions to grab what they could and transmit the data back before being destroyed. They fight like animals, complained Commander the Exodore of the Pelthian Concordat after losing 3 ships to human tactics that his military academy training had never prepared him. For they do not honor ceasefires, they do not respect neutral zones, and they weaponize everything, including their own casualties, what the Sitter called animalistic. Admiral Zhang called pragmatic. They expect us to fight by their rules, she told her staff after intercepting communications about Council complaints regarding human tactics. They expect honor and predictability, because that is how civilized species behave. But we did not survive ice ages and world wars by being predictable. The war dragged through its first year, then its second, and the Council member species began to murmur about the cost of what was supposed to have been a simple enforcement action. By the 3rd year, 2 species had withdrawn their forces entirely, claiming that protecting their home territories took priority over civilizing distant primitives. By the 5th year, the Council fleet had been reduced to 7 member species, and humans had achieved something that should have been impossible: technological parity in key areas. Every destroyed Council ship was a university for human engineers, who reverse-engineered shield generators from wreckage, studied alien power systems from captured components, and adapted Council weapons to human manufacturing techniques. They are learning too quickly, reported the Pelthian science advisor to the Council in a briefing that sent ripples of concern through the assembly. We estimate they have compressed 1,000 years of normal technological development into a single decade through aggressive reverse engineering and a complete disregard for safety protocols during testing. Human shield technology was crude compared to Council standards, but it worked well enough to turn battles that should have been massacres into grinding stalematation weapons. Were less efficient than their alien counterparts. But humans compensated by building more of them and accepting the higher resource costs that proper civilization would never tolerate in human ships. While inferior in individual capability, came in numbers that reflected a species willing to convert its entire industrial base to war production. Commander Zirith, now a decade older and bearing scars from a boarding action that still gave him nightmares, watched the Battle of Titan from his command ship and saw the Future of the conflict, humans had fortified Saturn's largest moon with weapons platforms that should not have existed. According to all reasonable projections of their technological development, the Council fleet outnumbered the defenders 3-1. But the humans had prepared the battlefield with a thoroughness of people who knew they could not afford to lose their foothold in the outer solar system. They will not retreat, Xerath said to his second in command, who had replaced his previous second after that officer had died in a human raid on a Council supply depot. Even when we break through their defenses, even when the battle is clearly lost, they will continue fighting until every last one of them is dead. Then we will oblige them. His second replied with the casual cruelty of someone who had been at war too long, but Xerath shook his head, his eyes fixed on the tactical display where human positions were highlighted in red. You do not understand. He said quietly, every one of them we kill becomes a martyr that inspires 10 more. Every position we take costs us resources we cannot easily replace this far from Council space. And every battle we win brings us no closer to actual victory. The Battle of Titan lasted 3 weeks and ended with a Council victory that felt like defeat. Humans evacuated most of their personnel through tunnels the Council had not detected, destroyed their own installations to deny the Council useful salvage, and left behind automated weapons that continued firing long after any reasonable species would have surrendered. Xerath stood in the ruins of the main human command center and looked at messages scrawled on the walls by defenders who had known they were going to die. Earth remembers, said one. We are still here, said he. Another, you have not won, said a third. And Xerath realized with cold certainty that the message was absolutely correct back at Threshold Prime. High Archivist Mothkar studied reports from the ongoing conflict with the sad satisfaction of someone whose warnings had been ignored and then proven correct. How long? Asked a younger archivist who had been assigned to help document the human war. How long until the Council accepts that they cannot win? Mothkar's multiple eyes dimmed with ancient sorrow as he calculated trajectories based on patterns he had seen. Before, in species long dead, the Council will never accept it, he said slowly. They will continue this war until either humanity is extinct or the Council itself breaks apart from the strain. Because to admit defeat to primitives would undermine the entire foundation of their authority in the humans. They will fight until one of those outcomes occurs, Mothkar replied, because they do not stop, they do not yield. And they have now added one more characteristic to their profile: they do not forget. He pulled up casualty reports that showed human losses in the millions and Council losses in the hundreds of thousands. Numbers that should have broken human resistance years ago. See these figures. He asked his student, any other species would have surrendered at a fraction of these casualties. But humans measure their dead and become more determined, not less, in the solar system. Admiral Zhang received reports of the Titan evacuation and nodded with grim satisfaction, despite the territory lost we bought. Another 6 months, she told her staff. 6 months for our shipyards to finish the new destroyer class. 6 months for our scientists to crack their targeting system encryption. 6 months closer to the day when we stop defending and start attacking around her. Officers from nations that had once been enemies now work together with the seamless coordination of people united by a common purpose. Council had wanted to bring humanity into civilization instead. They had created something they could not have anticipated, a unified human species with a single goal. And the absolute determination to achieve it. The war entered its 10th year with no end in sight. And across the galaxy, species began to ask a question that would have been unthinkable a decade before. What if the humans win? Commander Xerath stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the approach to Arcturus station with the weary eyes of someone who had been at war for 15 years and could barely remember what peace felt like. The station hung in space like a defiant monument to human engineering, a massive construction of metal and determination that had been built in secret over 3 years and represented humanity's largest military installation. Outside their home system, 5 times our strength, reported his tactical officer. Highlighting the defensive positions that bristled with weapons humanity had not possessed a decade and a half ago. They have shield generators matching our own specifications. Point defense systems covering every approach vector, and enough firepower to hold against a fleet twice our size. Xerath nodded slowly, his scales gray with age and stress. Knowing that the Council had sent him here with orders to take the station, regardless of cost, the Battle of Arcturus Station began with a Council bombardment that lit up space like a newborn star, and the human shields held against the initial assault with a resilience that spoke to how far human. Technology had advanced. Human return fire was immediate and precise, targeting Council ships with weapons that had been designed specifically to exploit weaknesses in alien armor configurations. Battle fell into a pattern that had become sickeningly familiar to Xerath over the years. The Council would advance. Humans would make them pay in blood for every meter, and neither side would break because both had committed too much to accept defeat by the third day. Xerath's fleet had lost a dozen ships, and the human station remained operational despite massive damage to its outer sections by the fifth day. Both sides were running low on ammunition and had resorted to kinetic weapons and boarding actions by the seventh day. Xerath led a boarding party, personally because he had lost so many junior officers that there was no one else qualified to coordinate. The assault on the station's command center. Fighting inside Arcturus Station was brutal in ways that ship-to-ship combat could never match, and Xerath found himself in narrow corridors fighting humans who refused to retreat. Even when wounded, he cornered a human officer in what had been a command post before the battle, had reduced it to a smoking ruin filled with bodies from both sides. Human was a woman whose uniform identified her as Captain Maria Chen, and she held a sidearm pointed at him with steady hands, despite the blood running down her face from a head wound. Surrender, Xerath said in English, a language he had learned over years of interrogating human prisoners. Your station is falling. Your reinforcements cannot reach you in time, and you have no reason to die here. Chen laughed, a sound without humor that made Xerath's scales ripple with unease. You still do not understand us at all, she said, her weapon never wavering even after 15 years of war. You still think we fight because we believe we can win every battle. She gestured around the destroyed command post with her free hand, while keeping her eyes and weapon fixed on Xerath. We fight because surrender is not in our nature. Because every moment we hold you here is another moment our people have to prepare better defenses. And because we want you to remember the cost of every meter you take from us. Xerath realized she was going to shoot him, and he was going to have to kill her. And the thought filled him with a weariness so deep it felt like drowning. Why? He asked, genuinely wanting to understand the species he had been fighting for half his adult life. Why continue a war you cannot win against an enemy with superior resources? Chen lowered her weapon slightly, and Xerath saw something in her eyes that he had seen in mirrors lately. Exhaustion beyond measure, cannot win, she repeated. Commander, we are winning. The statement was so absurd given the tactical situation that Xerath almost laughed. But something in her voice made him pause. Your fleet had 500 ships when you first came to Earth, Chen continued, her voice taking on the quality of someone delivering a lecture. You have less than half that now, and we know 14 Council member species have withdrawn their support entirely. She took a step closer, ignoring the weapon Xerath had pointed at her, and returned, your people are dying for a council that has already abandoned you. And you know what we know from intercepting your communications? She asked, your government has been in secret talks about accepting a negotiated peace for 2 years, but they cannot admit it publicly because it would destroy the political careers of everyone involved. Xerath felt something cold settle in his chest because everything she said matched classified intelligence he had seen in recent briefings. What are you proposing? He asked carefully. A ceasefire. Chen replied, immediate cessation of hostilities so we can talk instead of continuing to kill each other for governance that no longer have the courage to admit this war was a mistake. The Council would brand me a traitor, Xerath said, but his voice lacked conviction. Would they? Chen asked, or would they quietly accept an excuse to end a war that is costing them more than they ever imagined possible? The conversation that followed in that ruined command post lasted 3 hours, and it ranged from tactics to philosophy to the fundamental question of what both sides were really fighting for. Xerath found himself talking to Chen, not as an enemy, but as a fellow warrior trapped in a conflict neither of them had started. And both were tired of sustaining my people wanted to bring you. Civilization, he said at one point, his weapon long since lowered. We thought we were doing you a favor by offering membership in the council. You wanted to conquer us, Chen corrected gently. You wanted our resources and our labor. And you dressed it up in the language of uplift and civilization to make yourselves feel better about subjugation, perhaps. Zirith admitted. The word tasting like defeat? But what happens now? If we stop fighting, what prevents your people from seeking revenge for 15 years of war? Chen was quiet for a long moment before answering, let me show you what partnership looks like instead of conquest. She finally said, let me prove that humans can be allies rather than enemies, and let us together build something better than what the council has become. Zirith made his decision in that moment, knowing it would either save lives or cost him everything he had worked for. He opened a secure channel to his fleet and ordered an immediate ceasefire, then used his command codes to establish a back-channel communication with the human government. Council's response to his actions was swift and predictable. Zirith was declared a traitor. His rank was stripped, and a council kill order was placed on both his fleet and Arcturus station. Something unexpected happened when the council sent forces to destroy the traitor and the humans he had allied with the Vryn fleet. Loyal not to the council, but to Zirith himself, chose to defect rather than watch their commander be executed. For seeking peace, the Battle of Arcturus shifted from human versus council to human Vryn, alliance versus council enforcement fleet. And the outcome shocked the galaxy. The combined forces did not just defend Arcturus station. They went on the offensive, striking at council supply lines and coordination centers with the kind of precise intelligence that only an insider could. Ezerith stood beside Captain Chen on the repaired bridge of Arcturus station and watched council ships retreat in disarray after losing a battle. They should have won easily. You were right, he said quietly. We are stronger together than apart, Chen nodded. Her eyes on the tactical display where human and Vryn ships moved in coordinated formations. That would have been unthinkable months. Before this is just the beginning, she said. Other species are watching what happens here, and they are asking themselves why they continue to fight for a council that treats them as resources rather than partners across the galaxy. The question rippled outward, like waves from a stone thrown into still water. Species that had contributed ships to the council fleet began to recall them, claiming they were needed for home defense neutrality declarations, started arriving at threshold. Prime from member species that had supported the council for centuries and in the shadows. Representatives from a dozen civilizations reached out to the Human Vryn Alliance to ask about this new model of partnership rather than hierarchy high. Archivist Mothkar watched the political situation unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. They are doing it again, he told a student. They are changing the structure of galactic civilization through sheer refusal to accept the status quo. Is that bad? The young archivist Askadmuth sighs, performed the complex pattern that indicated deep uncertainty among his people that depends entirely on what they choose to build in place of what they are tearing down, he said. The previous species matching this profile either destroyed themselves or became destroyers. But these humans have shown something neither of the others demonstrated. What is that? The capacity to turn enemies into allies. Mothkar replied, to offer partnership instead of demanding submission. And perhaps, most importantly, the wisdom to know that victory through cooperation is more valuable than victory through conquest at Arcturus Station. Zirith and Chen were already planning the next phase of their campaign. Not to destroy the council, but to force it to change. We need to reach Threshold Prime. Chen said, not with weapons, but with a proposal for a new galactic order. Zirith nodded, understanding what she meant. The combined human Vryn fleet arrived at Threshold Prime not as conquerors, but as revolutionaries. And the difference was significant in ways that would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. Admiral Zhang commanded the human forces from her flagship, the Rising Phoenix, while Commander Zirith led the Vryn ships from the Dominant Will, whose name had taken on ironic significance now that it flew in defiance of the Council. Multiple Council defense fleets are forming up, reported the tactical officer. Highlighting formations that represented the last military power the Council could muster, but we are receiving communications from ships within those fleets requesting clarification on their orders. Zhang allowed herself a small smile at the news that confirmed what her intelligence network had been reporting for weeks broadcast. Our message on all frequencies, she ordered. Make sure every ship out there knows what we are really fighting for. The transmission went out across the entire Threshold Prime system. And Captain Chen's voice carried the weight of 15 years of war as she spoke directly to the crews of Council ships. We did not come here to destroy the Council, she began. Her words translated into 100 languages simultaneously. We came to offer an alternative to the system that has kept the galaxy locked in stagnation for millennia. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing with the passion of someone who had fought too long for peace to let it slip away now. The Council tells you that hierarchy is necessary for order, that young species must be guided by elder civilizations, that some peoples are naturally suited to rule while others are meant to serve. We tell you that this is a lie designed to maintain power structures that benefit the few at the expense of the many. Across the Council defense fleets, crews listened to words that resonated with grievances many had harbored for generations, but never dared speak aloud. Join us, Chen continued, not as subjects to a new empire, not as conquered peoples accepting terms, but as equal partners in building a federation where your voices matter regardless of how long your species has traveled the stars. The first ship to break formation and join the Human-Vrin Alliance was a frigate from the Pelthian Concordat, whose captain had lost family in the war and could no longer justify fighting for a council that had lied about the reasons for conflict. The second was a cruiser from a species humanity had never encountered before, whose commander simply transmitted enough is enough. Before moving to join Zhang's fleet, by the time the Council hastily convened an emergency session, a third of their defense forces had defected, and another third had declared neutrality. Representative Quelix stood before the Council chamber, her scales pale with the realization that her civilization's dominance was crumbling. This is treason, she declared, her voice carrying the desperation of someone watching their world collapse. This is chaos that will destroy everything we have built over 10,000 years of careful stewardship. High Archivist Mothkar rose slowly from his seat, his ancient form commanding attention simply through the weight of accumulated years. What you built was a cage, he said quietly, his words cutting through Quelix's protest like a blade. What you called stewardship was control, and what you believed would last forever has revealed itself to be as fragile as all empires. Throughout galactic history, he turned to address the full Council, his multiple eyes reflecting sadness, but also something that might have been hope. The humans have given us a choice, he continued. We can fight them and lose everything as our member species abandon us one by one, or we can accept their proposal and transform ourselves into something better than what we have been. Never, Quelix shouted, her scales flushing with rage. The Vrin hegemony will never bow to primitive. The Vrin hegemony no longer exists, interrupted a new voice, and the chamber fell silent as Commander Zirith entered through doors that should have been barred to him as a declared traitor. He walked calmly to the center of the chamber, flanked by Captain Chen and a delegation of species who had joined the Alliance. My people voted 3 days ago to dissolve our participation in the Council and join the Federation, Zirith announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned respect through action rather than inherited it through position. We were followed by the Pelthian Concordat, the Archon Collective. 18 other species who chose partnership over hierarchy. Quelix stared at him with naked hatred, her claws extended in a threat display that would once have made him step back. You destroyed us, she hissed. You betrayed everything our people stood for. No, Zirith replied calmly. I saved us from extinction, fighting a war we could never win against an enemy we should have befriended from the beginning. Captain Chen stepped forward, her human frame small compared to the towering aliens around her, but her presence commanding. Tension nonetheless. We are not here to gloat or to punish, she said, addressing the Council directly. We are here to offer one final opportunity for peaceful transition. She activated a holographic display that showed the proposed structure of the Federation. A system of governance that balanced the wisdom of elder species with the innovation of younger civilizations. Every species has equal voting rights, regardless of age or size, she explained. Highlighting the key differences from council structure decisions require consensus rather than simple majority. Economic resources are shared based on need rather than concentrated in the hands of the powerful. And most importantly, membership as voluntary species can leave the Federation at any time without facing military consequences, can maintain their own governments and cultures, and can trade freely with Federation and non-Federation worlds alike. The proposal was radical by Council standards, representing a fundamental shift in how galactic civilization would organize itself. Mouthcar studied the details with the thoroughness of someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of countless political systems. It will not be perfect, he finally said, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. No system of governance created by imperfect beings can be perfect, but it is better than what we have now, and it offers something the Council has not provided in millennia: hope for real change. The vote that followed was not about whether to fight the Human-Vrin alliance. Too many Council species had already abandoned that cause instead. It was about whether the Council would dissolve gracefully and transition into the Federation, or whether it would cling to power until the last remnant of its authority crumbled away. The results surprised no one. 63 species voted to join the Federation immediately. 28 voted to remain neutral and observe before deciding, and only 7 voted to maintain the old council structure. Alex was among those 7. And she stormed from the chamber with the remnants of Vrin, loyalists who still believed in their civilization's right to rule. But even as she left, Captain Chen felt no satisfaction in her defeat. She will be back, Chen told Xerath quietly as they watched Quellix's ship depart Threshold Prime. Her and others like her who cannot accept that the galaxy has changed. Let them come, Xerath replied. We will meet them not with weapons, but with the proof that the Federation works better than the Council ever did. The Treaty of Soul was signed 3 months later in a ceremony aboard a space station built jointly by humans and a dozen other species, and it marked the formal beginning of the Federation High. Archivist Mothkar attended the ceremony and brought with him something he had kept secret for millennia: records of the previous 2 species, matching humanity's profile. You asked me once, what happened to them, he said to Admiral Zhang during a private moment before the formal signing. The first species destroyed themselves in civil war within 50 years of achieving faster than light travel, he explained, displaying fragmentary records recovered from dead worlds. They had humanity's determination and adaptability, but lacked the wisdom to channel it toward cooperation. And the second, Zhang asked, already suspecting the answer. They conquered brutally and efficiently, building an empire that lasted 3,000 years before collapsing under the weight of rebellions they could not suppress. Mothkar continued, they had humanity's unstoppable nature, but chose domination over partnership. He fixed all his eyes on Zhang with an intensity that made even the hardened admiral shift slightly. You are the third, he said, quietly, the third chance for a species with your profile to choose what it will become. And you have chosen something neither of the others could manage. What is that? Zhang asked. To build instead of destroy. Mothkar replied, to offer hands in partnership instead of fists in dominance, and to recognize that being unstoppable does not require being destructive. The formal signing ceremony was attended by representatives from over 100 species, and the contrast with council gatherings was stark. Where council meetings had been rigid and formal, the Federation gathering was chaotic and energetic as species who had never been allowed. Equal voices suddenly found themselves heard. Captain Chen stood with Commander Xerath at the observation window, watching ships from 100 worlds orbit in formations that would have been impossible under council rule at Chang.